The sun filtered through the narrow blinds of a modest apartment in the heart of the city, casting fragmented beams of light onto a cluttered workspace. Elijah Carter, a young black artist in his late 20s, sat hunched over his easel, his hands moving with both precision and passion. Paint streaks decorated his fingers and forearms, a testament to the hours he spent breathing life into his canvases. The apartment was more than just his home, it was his sanctuary. Every corner reflected his soul, with unfinished paintings leaning against walls and shelves lined with sketchbooks and jars of paintbrushes. The hum of the city outside was constant, car horns, chatter, and the occasional siren. Yet, Elijah found solace in the rhythm of his brushstrokes. His latest piece, a sprawling depiction of a jazz band in motion, captured the energy and soul of the music he grew up with. The colors were bold and unapologetic, much like Elijah himself. He paused to examine his work, tilting his head as he evaluated the balance of light and shadow. Though satisfaction glimmered in his eyes, there was a lingering doubt, a question he often asked himself: would anyone else see the beauty he poured into his art? Background and struggles. Elijah's journey hadn't been easy. Born in a small southern town, he was raised by his grandmother after his parents passed away when he was just a boy. His grandmother, a retired schoolteacher, was his first inspiration. She would tell him stories of the Harlem Renaissance and show him faded photographs of artists and musicians who had transformed adversity into art. Her words lit a spark in young Elijah, and by the time he was 10, he was sketching on every scrap of paper he could find. But as he grew older, the world around him grew less encouraging. In high school, he was often told to focus on practical pursuits. Teachers dismissed his talent as a hobby, and guidance counselors pushed him toward vocational careers. Even as he earned a scholarship to a prestigious art school, the weight of systemic barriers loomed large. At art school, Elijah's talent was undeniable, but the predominantly white faculty and student body often dismissed the themes in his work as too niche or too political. His art, which celebrated black culture and addressed social issues, was seen as unmarketable in the commercial art world. When he graduated, Elijah struggled to find opportunities to showcase his work. Galleries rarely returned his calls, and when they did, their interest waned the moment they saw the artist behind the canvas. Still, Elijah persevered. By day, he worked a string of odd jobs: bartender, delivery driver, and occasionally a muralist for community projects. By night, he poured his soul into his art. His small studio apartment became his world, a place where he could dream and create without judgment. Despite the rejections, the financial struggles, and the subtle racism he faced daily, Elijah held on to the belief that his art mattered. The gallery. On the other side of town, a very different world thrived. Whitman Gallery, an exclusive and high-profile venue, was a hub for the city's elite. Its owner, Gerald Whitman, was a man of sharp suits, sharper words, and a reputation for his unyielding standards. Gerald prided himself on curating art that appealed to wealthy collectors, often prioritizing aesthetics over substance. He had little patience for emerging artists unless they came with pedigree or connections. Whitman's gallery was an imposing structure, all glass and steel, exuding an aura of wealth and exclusivity. Inside, the walls were lined with works that Gerald deemed worthy, abstract pieces by well-known names and installations that catered to the tastes of his affluent clientele. He dismissed the idea of art as a medium for storytelling or social commentary, often mocking works that didn't fit his narrow definition of sellable. For him, art was a commodity, nothing more. The event. One rainy afternoon, Elijah saw a flyer for an open submission event at Whitman Gallery. It was rare for the gallery to host such an event, but Gerald had decided it was a clever marketing move to attract fresh talent and boost his gallery's relevance. Despite knowing the gallery's reputation, Elijah saw the event as an opportunity to get his work in front of influential eyes. Elijah spent days preparing, choosing 3 of his best pieces: a vibrant portrait of a young black girl with natural hair adorned with flowers, an abstract representation of the civil rights movement, and his jazz band piece. Each painting told a story, capturing the resilience, beauty, and spirit of black culture. On the day of the event, he carefully packed his canvases and headed to the gallery, his heart pounding with a mix of hope and dread. The gallery was buzzing with activity when Elijah arrived. Artists of all backgrounds had gathered, their works propped up against walls or carried in portfolios. Gerald Whitman stood near the entrance, greeting attendees with a practiced smile that barely concealed his disinterest. As Elijah approached with his paintings, Gerald's gaze flickered briefly over him before landing on the canvases. "What do we have here?" Gerald asked, his tone dripping with condescension. Elijah introduced himself and began to explain the stories behind his work, but Gerald cut him off with a dismissive wave. He studied the paintings for a few seconds, his expression unreadable, before scoffing. "Amateur," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for Elijah to hear. Then, looking directly at him, Gerald added, "These are colorful, but they lack sophistication. We're looking for something a bit more refined." The words hit Elijah like a punch to the gut. He opened his mouth to respond, but Gerald had already turned to greet another artist, his dismissal final and absolute. Elijah stood there for a moment, the room spinning around him as whispers and sidelong glances from other attendees filled the air. Gathering his paintings, he left the gallery, the humiliation burning in his chest. Seed of change. Elijah walked aimlessly through the city streets, the rain mingling with the tears he refused to let fall. His mind replayed Gerald's words over and over, each repetition amplifying his self-doubt. He thought of his grandmother, of the sacrifices she made to nurture his passion, and the countless hours he had spent honing his craft. Was it all for nothing? As he rounded a corner, he collided with a woman carrying a bright yellow umbrella. She was petite, with sharp features and an air of confidence. Apologizing quickly, Elijah bent to pick up the sketches that had spilled from her bag. She noticed the paintings he carried and paused. "Wow," she said, her eyes lighting up as she pointed to the jazz band piece. "Did you paint this?" Elijah nodded hesitantly, unsure of how to respond. The woman introduced herself as Olivia Ching, a well-known art influencer and curator with a massive online following. She explained that she was in town scouting for fresh talent and asked if she could see more of his work. For the first time that day, Elijah felt a flicker of hope. He invited her to his apartment, where he showed her his collection. Olivia was captivated, praising his ability to convey emotion and narrative through color and form. She insisted on purchasing one of his paintings, and asked if she could feature his work on her social media platform. Though skeptical, Elijah agreed. As Olivia left, she turned to him and said, "Your art is incredible. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." That night, Elijah sat in his studio, staring at the blank canvas before him. Gerald's mockery still stung, but Olivia's words echoed louder. Determined, he picked up his brush and began to paint, channeling his pain, anger, and newfound resolve into his work. Little did he know, this encounter was the beginning of a journey that would change his life forever. New opportunity. The morning after his encounter with Olivia Ching, Elijah Carter woke up to an unusual number of notifications on his phone. Blinking sleep from his eyes, he scrolled through the messages, realizing that Olivia had posted about his art on her social media accounts. Her caption read, "Discovering hidden gems is my favorite part of this job, and Elijah Carter is a true diamond in the rough. His work is bold, emotional, and unapologetically authentic. Watch this space, this artist is going places." The post included a photo of Elijah's jazz band painting, its vibrant colors practically leaping off the screen. Within hours, it had garnered thousands of likes, comments, and shares. Followers tagged prominent art collectors, gallery owners, and fellow artists, urging them to check out Elijah's work. The once quiet inbox of Elijah's email account was now flooded with inquiries. At first, Elijah was overwhelmed. He reread Olivia's post several times, trying to make sense of how quickly everything seemed to be changing. People who had never given him the time of day were suddenly calling him a visionary and the next big thing. Despite his initial skepticism, he responded to as many inquiries as he could, carefully balancing his excitement with caution. Olivia reached out later that day to congratulate him, offering advice on how to navigate the sudden attention. "You have something rare, Elijah," she said over the phone. "Don't let anyone take advantage of it." Going viral. The momentum was unstoppable. Within days, Elijah's art had gone viral, spreading beyond Olivia's circle of followers. Art critics began discussing his work in online forums, praising his ability to merge vivid storytelling with complex cultural themes. One well-known critic described his pieces as visual poetry that captures the soul of a people. Elijah's website, which he had hastily updated with photos of his paintings, began receiving hundreds of hits per hour. Collectors from across the country reached out, offering significant sums for his work. Some pieces sold for more money than Elijah had made in an entire year from odd jobs. He could hardly believe it. The jazz band painting that Olivia had purchased became an instant icon. Its image appeared on art blogs, magazine covers, and even merchandise created by admirers. For the first time, Elijah felt like his art was being seen and understood on a grand scale. The shift. As the buzz around his work grew, Elijah found himself being invited to exclusive events and featured in interviews. His name became synonymous with authenticity, his story inspiring countless others who felt marginalized in their pursuits. What struck Elijah most was the stark contrast between this new reality and the one he had known just weeks before. The same art world that had once dismissed him now celebrated him as a rising star. Rejections from galleries were replaced with invitations to exhibit. Collectors who had previously ignored him were now offering exorbitant prices to own even a single piece of his work. Despite the sudden influx of wealth and recognition, Elijah remained grounded. He continued to live in his modest apartment, though he upgraded his studio space to better accommodate his growing demands. He donated a portion of his earnings to local art programs, determined to uplift other underrepresented artists. Olivia became a trusted mentor and friend, guiding Elijah through the complexities of his newfound fame. She taught him how to negotiate contracts, protect his intellectual property, and navigate the often cutthroat world of high art. "This is your moment," she reminded him during one of their meetings. "But it's also your opportunity to create lasting change." Building a reputation. Elijah's big break came when he was invited to showcase his work at a rival gallery, the prestigious Monroe Art Collective. Unlike Whitman Gallery, the Monroe Collective was known for championing diverse voices and celebrating art that told compelling stories. The exhibit, titled Voices in Color, was a resounding success. Elijah's paintings occupied a central space, drawing crowds who marveled at the depth and emotion in his work. Journalists covered the event extensively, and Elijah was interviewed by major publications. Standing in the gallery, surrounded by his paintings and the people who admired them, Elijah felt a profound sense of validation. Here, his art was not just seen, but celebrated. It wasn't just a transaction, it was a connection. The gallery owner, a warm and supportive woman named Clara Monroe, personally congratulated Elijah on his success. "Your work speaks volumes," she said. "It's raw, honest, and necessary. The world needs more artists like you." Personal growth. With each success, Elijah's confidence grew. He no longer doubted the value of his art or the importance of his voice. Still, he remained humble, attributing his success to the support of his community and the lessons he had learned along the way. He often spoke about his grandmother in interviews, crediting her as his first inspiration and the reason he had never given up. Elijah began mentoring young artists from his neighborhood, offering workshops and sharing his journey. He wanted to create a space where aspiring creators could feel seen and supported, unlike the isolation he had once experienced. "I'm standing here because someone believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself," he said during one of his workshops. "Now it's my turn to pass that on." Through it all, Elijah never forgot the sting of his rejection at Whitman Gallery. But instead of harboring resentment, he used it as fuel. He knew there were countless others like him, talented, driven, and overlooked, waiting for their chance. And Elijah was determined to make sure they got it. Unexpected meeting. Months after Elijah's meteoric rise in the art world, Gerald Whitman found himself in a precarious position. The once thriving Whitman Gallery had begun losing relevance. A younger, more diverse generation of collectors and art enthusiasts was rejecting the gallery's elitist reputation in favor of venues that celebrated authenticity and innovation. Critics had begun to question Whitman's outdated curation style, and the whispers about his condescending demeanor had turned into outright criticisms on social media. Desperate to restore his gallery's reputation, Whitman decided to capitalize on the wave of fresh talent sweeping the industry. He instructed his assistant to compile a list of emerging artists with significant followings, hoping to lure them into his upcoming event, the New Vanguard. One name stood out above the rest, Elijah Carter. Whitman had heard the name in passing but hadn't connected it to the young man he had dismissed months ago. All he knew was that Elijah was being hailed as a revolutionary voice in contemporary art. His assistant reached out with a carefully worded invitation, framing it as an opportunity for Elijah to showcase his work on an even grander stage. When Elijah received the email, he was stunned. He immediately recognized the name of the gallery and its owner, and memories of that humiliating afternoon came rushing back. The anger he thought he had let go of bubbled to the surface. But as he read the email again, a smile tugged at the corner of his lips. This was a moment he couldn't ignore. Revelation. Elijah accepted the invitation without hesitation, though he chose to keep his identity a secret until the meeting. He wanted Whitman to confront his own arrogance without the advantage of pretense or preparation. The meeting was scheduled for a Wednesday afternoon at the gallery. When Elijah arrived, dressed in a tailored suit that spoke to his newfound success, the receptionist greeted him warmly, completely unaware of who he was. The once intimidating gallery felt smaller now, less imposing. He noted the sparse attendance and the fading grandeur of the place. Whitman emerged from his office moments later, his hand extended in a calculated gesture of politeness. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice smooth. "It's an honor to finally meet you. Your work is extraordinary." Elijah shook his hand, studying Whitman's face. There wasn't even a flicker of recognition. "Thank you," Elijah replied, his tone neutral. "It's surreal to be here." Whitman led him to a private meeting room, where wine and hors d'oeuvres had been prepared. As they sat, Whitman began his pitch. He spoke about the gallery's history and its role in launching the careers of countless artists. He described the New Vanguard as a celebration of contemporary visionaries, emphasizing how Elijah's inclusion would elevate the event. Elijah listened in silence, letting Whitman paint his narrative. Then, leaning back in his chair, he said calmly, "It's interesting that you reached out to me. Do you remember the last time we met?" Whitman furrowed his brow, clearly caught off guard. "The last time? I'm sorry, I don't believe we've had the pleasure before." The confrontation. Elijah's smile was cold as he leaned forward. "We have. I was here, in this very gallery, with 3 of my best paintings. It was during your open submission event. You looked at my work for about 10 seconds, before calling it amateur and dismissing me." Whitman's face drained of color. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came out. Elijah continued, his voice steady but sharp. "You didn't just reject my work. You humiliated me. You mocked the stories I was trying to tell. And now, here we are." The room was heavy with tension. Whitman's mind raced as he replayed the memory. Flashes of that day came back to him, the young man with the vibrant paintings, the brief glance he had given them before dismissing him as unworthy. He swallowed hard, realizing the magnitude of his mistake. I didn't realize," Whitman stammered. I'm so sorry, Mr. Carter. That was unprofessional of me. If I had known." Elijah cut him off. "If you had known what? That my work would one day be celebrated? That I'd be successful enough for you to want a piece of it? Or that your gallery would be struggling to stay relevant?" Whitman's apology faltered. He was a man used to control, but here, the power dynamic had shifted entirely. "I made a mistake," he admitted, his tone more measured. "I see that now. But I want to make it right. This is a chance to move forward, to put the past behind us. Whitman's apology. Elijah studied Whitman, his insincere motives as transparent as the glass walls of the gallery. Whitman's apology wasn't about remorse, it was about survival. He needed Elijah, not because he valued his art, but because he saw it as a lifeline for his floundering gallery. Make it right? Elijah echoed, his voice laced with disbelief. Do you think an apology erases what you did? You didn't just reject my work, you rejected me. You dismissed me without a second thought because I didn't fit your narrow idea of what art should be. Now that the world sees me differently, you want to act like it never happened? Whitman opened his mouth to respond, but Elijah held up a hand. Save it. I don't need your validation, Mr. Whitman. I built something on my own, without people like you telling me what I'm worth. Power dynamics. Elijah rose from his chair, his presence commanding. I'm not here to accept your offer. I'm here to remind you that people like me don't need to beg for scraps anymore. The art world is changing, and your gallery can either evolve or fade away. Whitman looked stunned, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. Elijah turned to leave, pausing at the door. One more thing, he said, glancing back. The next time an artist walks into your gallery, take a moment to actually see them. You might be surprised at what you're missing. With that, Elijah walked out, leaving Whitman alone in the sterile, lifeless room. As the door closed behind him, Elijah felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He didn't need Whitman's approval or his platform. He had found his voice, and it was louder than any gallery's walls could contain. Outside, the city buzzed with life, and Elijah smiled, knowing that his journey was far from over. Public scandal. It didn't take long for the story of Elijah Carter's confrontation with Gerald Whitman to leak. A few attendees at Whitman Gallery that day had overheard fragments of their tense exchange, and one of them, a journalist for a prominent art blog, published an article about it. The piece, titled When Elitism Fails, A Gallery Owner's Fall from Grace, chronicled Whitman's initial dismissal of Elijah's work and the subsequent plea for collaboration. The article quickly went viral, with readers sharing it across social media platforms. Comments flooded in, most condemning Whitman for his condescending behavior and celebrating Elijah's resilience. Memes appeared, comparing Whitman's gallery to a relic of the past, unable to adapt to a changing art world. Meanwhile, Elijah's story resonated deeply with aspiring artists, many of whom shared their own experiences of rejection and systemic bias in creative industries. The backlash against Whitman was swift and unforgiving. Prominent art critics who had once supported his gallery publicly distanced themselves. Collectors began canceling events, and artists withdrew their work from upcoming exhibits. Whitman's reputation, carefully cultivated over decades, crumbled in the span of weeks. Elijah, however, remained silent as the controversy swirled. He refused interviews and avoided commenting on the situation. He knew that anything he said could either fuel the flames or be misconstrued as vindictive. But the silence didn't come easily. Everywhere he went, people asked him for his thoughts. Friends and strangers alike encouraged him to revel in Whitman's downfall, to bask in the poetic justice of it all. Yet, a small voice in his mind whispered, "What now?" Elijah's dilemma. As the weeks passed, Elijah found himself grappling with conflicting emotions. On one hand, he felt vindicated. The same art world that had ignored him was now hanging on his every word. Whitman's fall felt like justice, a reckoning for the arrogance and exclusion he had perpetuated for years. Yet, Elijah couldn't shake the feeling that focusing on Whitman's failure wasn't enough. It didn't solve the deeper issues plaguing the art world, issues that had kept him, and countless others, in the shadows for so long. Olivia Ching, his mentor and friend, was the first to broach the subject. "You've already proven yourself, Elijah," she said during one of their conversations. "But the real question is, what do you want to do with this platform? You've got the world's attention. Don't waste it on something as small as revenge." Her words stayed with him. Elijah began reflecting on his journey, thinking about the young artists he had met at community workshops, the ones who reminded him of himself before his rise to fame. He thought of his grandmother, whose wisdom and strength had always been his guiding light. What would she want him to do? He knew the answer: he had to build something bigger than himself. The mentor. Seeking clarity, Elijah visited an old mentor, Mr. Langston, a retired artist and activist who had been a pillar of their community for decades. Mr. Langston had mentored Elijah in his teenage years, teaching him not just about art but about its power to inspire change. The elder artist's home was a treasure trove of history, with walls adorned by works from every stage of his career and bookshelves overflowing with literature on civil rights, art, and philosophy. Over tea, Elijah poured out his thoughts, the bitterness he felt toward Whitman, the guilt over his own growing success, and the weight of expectations placed on him by others. Mr. Langston listened patiently before speaking. "Elijah," he began, his voice steady and warm, "success is a double-edged sword. It gives you power, but it also gives you responsibility. You've been given a gift, not just your talent, but the platform you've earned through it. The question is, how will you use it? Will you let it stop at proving people wrong? Or will you use it to lift others up?" The elder artist leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "Legacy isn't about the battles you win. It's about the doors you open for others. Think about what kind of legacy you want to leave." Elijah left that meeting with a renewed sense of purpose. He knew what he needed to do. New vision. Inspired by his conversations with Olivia and Mr. Langston, Elijah began devising a plan. Rather than dwelling on Whitman's failures, he wanted to focus on building something positive, a space where artists like him could thrive without facing the barriers he had encountered. Using the earnings from his recent success, Elijah purchased a small, vacant gallery space in the heart of his neighborhood. The building had seen better days, but Elijah saw its potential. He envisioned it as more than just a gallery. It would be a community hub, a place where underrepresented artists could showcase their work, collaborate, and grow. He named it the Mosaic Gallery, symbolizing the diversity and interconnectedness of the artists it would support. Elijah enlisted local artists and volunteers to help with renovations, ensuring the space reflected the community it served. Walls were painted with vibrant murals, and the gallery was designed to be welcoming and inclusive, with room for workshops, lectures, and even a small library of art resources. Elijah also created a mentorship program, partnering with experienced artists to guide younger ones. "This isn't just about showcasing art," he explained during a planning meeting. "It's about creating opportunities and building bridges. No one should have to go through what I went through just to be seen." The announcement. When the gallery was ready, Elijah made a public announcement. Standing in front of the Mosaic Gallery, surrounded by supporters and members of the media, he spoke from the heart. "I've spent years fighting to be seen, to have my work valued for what it is, not for how it fits into someone else's idea of art," he began. "And along the way, I realized I wasn't the only one. There are countless artists out there with stories to tell, with voices that deserve to be heard. This gallery is for them." He paused, glancing at the crowd before continuing. "The art world is changing, and it's up to us to decide what it becomes. We can cling to the old ways, the exclusivity, and the gatekeeping. Or we can build something better, something that celebrates creativity in all its forms." The announcement was met with overwhelming support. Media outlets praised Elijah's initiative, and his story continued to inspire artists and collectors alike. The Mosaic Gallery quickly became a beacon of hope and a symbol of the power of art to unite and uplift. A new chapter. Though Whitman's gallery struggled to recover, Elijah no longer thought about it. He was too focused on the work ahead, mentoring young artists, curating exhibits, and building a legacy that would outlast any scandal. In the Mosaic Gallery, he saw the fulfillment of a dream not just for himself, but for his community. Elijah Carter had started as a struggling artist seeking validation. Now, he was a leader, a visionary, and a force for change in an industry that desperately needed it. And in the vibrant halls of his gallery, surrounded by art that told 1,000 stories, he knew he had found his purpose, the grand opening. The day of the Mosaic Gallery's grand opening was one of celebration, vibrancy, and hope. A crisp blue banner with the gallery's name hung proudly over the entrance, and the scent of fresh paint mingled with the aroma of food trucks lining the street. Inside, every wall and corner of the gallery was alive with color and energy, showcasing work from a diverse array of artists. Each piece told a unique story, some addressing social issues, others celebrating culture and heritage, but all were unified by their authenticity and emotion. The opening exhibit, titled Unveiled Voices, featured artists from marginalized communities who had rarely been given the opportunity to showcase their work. There were portraits of everyday heroes, abstract depictions of resilience, and installations that challenged perceptions of identity and belonging. Elijah had handpicked each artist, ensuring that their stories were front and center. A line of visitors stretched down the block, eager to see the gallery and its message of inclusion. Journalists, art critics, and community members mingled, their conversations filled with admiration for the space and its mission. Elijah stood near the entrance, greeting attendees with a mix of humility and pride. This wasn't just an opening, it was the realization of a dream. "I've never seen anything like this," said one visitor, a young aspiring artist. "It feels like a place where people like me belong." Whitman's Fall. Meanwhile, across town, Whitman Gallery painted a starkly different picture. Once the crown jewel of the city's art scene, its sleek, sterile halls now felt hollow. Attendance had plummeted, and the roster of high-profile clients and collectors had dwindled to almost nothing. Critics had turned their pens against Gerald Whitman, labeling him an artifact of a bygone era, an emblem of the art world's worst tendencies. Rumors swirled that Whitman was struggling to keep the gallery afloat. He had tried to recover from the scandal by shifting his approach, but it was too little, too late. His name had become synonymous with arrogance and exclusion, and his reputation was beyond repair. While Whitman had once dismissed artists like Elijah, his downfall served as a cautionary tale of the cost of ignoring talent and clinging to outdated ideals. For Elijah, there was no satisfaction in Whitman's failure. He had moved past it, focused on building something meaningful. The contrast between their trajectories was not lost on others, though, and many viewed Elijah's success as poetic justice. Community celebration. The Mosaic Gallery quickly became more than just a gallery, it was a cornerstone of the community. Artists who had once struggled to find their place now had a platform, and local residents took pride in the space as a beacon of creativity and culture. Workshops, panel discussions, and live performances turned the gallery into a vibrant hub of activity. One young artist, Sofia Ramirez, spoke during the opening event. "When I first started painting, I thought my work wasn't good enough for galleries like this," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "But Elijah believed in me. He gave me a chance when no one else would, and now my art is hanging on these walls. This space is a dream come true for so many of us." Elijah listened from the back of the room, his heart full. These were the moments he had dreamed of, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated. He could see the impact of his work in the smiles, the laughter, and the inspiration radiating from every corner of the gallery. Reflection. That evening, after the crowds had dispersed and the gallery was quiet, Elijah found himself alone in the main hall. He walked slowly, taking in the artwork and the memories it evoked. Each piece reminded him of his own journey, from the small southern town where he first discovered his love of art, to the rejection he faced at Whitman Gallery, to the overwhelming support he had found along the way. He thought of his grandmother, whose stories had sparked his imagination and whose unwavering belief in him had been his foundation. He thought of Olivia Ching, whose encouragement had helped him see his own worth, and of Mr. Langston, whose wisdom had guided him toward a higher purpose. Their voices echoed in his mind, reminding him that he hadn't walked this path alone. Standing in the center of the gallery, Elijah closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He felt the weight of his struggles and the triumph of his achievements, both intertwined in the tapestry of his life. His journey had been far from easy, but it had shaped him into the artist and the man he was today. A legacy begins. The following morning, the sun rose over the Mosaic Gallery, casting a golden glow on its walls. Elijah stood outside, watching as a new wave of visitors arrived. Among them were young artists clutching portfolios, their eyes wide with hope and excitement. Elijah greeted them warmly, knowing that this was just the beginning of their journeys. As he looked up at the banner bearing the gallery's name, a sense of fulfillment washed over him. This was his legacy, not just the art he created, but the opportunities he provided for others to create their own. Elijah Carter had once been mocked, dismissed, and underestimated. But now, he stood tall as a magnate of change, proving that perseverance and talent could overcome even the most entrenched prejudice. In the halls of his gallery, surrounded by art that celebrated humanity in all its forms, Elijah knew that his story was far from over. It had only just begun.